God-level duplication system. Chapter 211. Advancement. Sect leader, Zhongxing, Grand Elder, and the other higher-ups of the Yang Essence sect heard the news. Their faces froze, and they couldn't help but reveal a look of disbelief. After all, Huiyuan Zhenren was sent by one of the major powers of the Maple Martial region, the core of Fengwu State. He was the one in charge of the competition. The scope of his vision was beyond their imagination. In the past few years, he had come to the Scorching Sun domain with a cold expression on his face as if he didn't care about them at all. It was as if no one in the entire Scorching Sun domain was worthy of his attention. Even the genius Zhang Yukin, who was ranked on the Profound Essence list, was the same. What about today? Huiyuan Zhenren actually took the initiative to praise Lin Xuan. Didn't this mean that Lin Xuan had entered Huiyuan Zhenren's eyes? But Zhang Yukin couldn't compare to Lin Xuan. The eyes of all the higher-ups in the Yang Essence sect widened. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. They stood rooted to the ground and fell into deep shock. The excitement in their hearts couldn't be calmed down. On the fifth ring, several more explosions rang out. Only then did everyone react and look over. At this time, Duan Fakin took the opportunity to attack, sweeping all the survivors off the arena. Of course, Duan Fakin was also very smart. He knew that he couldn't afford to offend Lin Xuan. He also didn't provoke Lu Qiannia and Chen Hanchuang. At this moment, there were only 4 people left on the fifth ring. It was the result of the first round of chaotic battles. The other 4 rings had only begun not long ago. The difference was so great that it was hard to describe. When everyone saw this scene, they all sighed with emotion. No one had expected that things would turn out this way. The faces of the upper echelons of the various major powers, who were eliminated by Lin Xuan with a single palm strike, turned extremely ugly. Their disciples had actually been eliminated so quickly. This was too humiliating. But they could only let this matter rest. They didn't dare to find trouble with Lin Xuan. Because the strength that Lin Xuan had displayed wasn't much weaker than that of the 4 young masters. The potential of a top genius like Lin Xuan was unimaginable. Lin Xuan was not someone they could afford to offend. They could only admit their bad luck. On the square, the judge, who was not far away, finally reacted when he saw this. He hurriedly stepped onto the arena and announced with a clear voice, "Arena number 5, the first round of chaotic battle has ended. Lin Xuan, Duan Fakin, Lu Qiannia, and Chen Hanchuang will advance to the next round." As soon as he finished speaking, another wave of commotion broke out. On the arena, Chen Hanchuang and Lu Qiannia also had confused expressions on their faces. It's over just like that? They leveled up. This series of changes happened too quickly and too quickly. The 2 of them were still unable to accept the truth in such a brief period of time. Only when the referee announced the results did the 2 of them come back to their senses. They looked at Lin Xuan with extreme shock and complicated expressions. "Thank you, senior brother Lin. Lin Xuan, thank you very much for this time." Both of them bowed and thanked Lin Xuan. After they recovered from their shock, they were also incredibly happy in their hearts. Originally, the 2 of them were eliminated in the first round of the competition. They didn't expect that they would be able to advance to the next round after being basked in Lin Xuan's glory. No matter what, they had advanced to the second round. They had obtained a spot to take part in the competition. This was something worth being happy about. At the same time, both of them were once again shocked by Lin Xuan's strength. This time, it was different from the last time they were in the puppet secret realm. That time, Lin Xuan had used the inheritance that he had obtained, which was why he had used that powerful sword attack to defeat nearly 100 spirit opening stage warriors. But this time, Lin Xuan had sent over 50 spirit opening stage warriors flying with just a casual palm attack. Moreover, they were within 10 meters of him, but they were not affected in the slightest. It could be imagined how much Lin Xuan's strength had increased. And during this period of time, it had only been 10 days. Lin Xuan's strength had increased to such an extent, and it also showed how terrifying his talent was. Both of them were incomparably shocked, and they were unable to calm down. "You don't have to be polite." When Lin Xuan heard this, he waved his hand and replied. It was as if he had just done a small thing. He looked at the attribute panel in the void in front of him, which was growing continuously, and nodded slightly. "Let's go," Lin Xuan at once said. He jumped off the arena and walked towards the south side of the platform. Chen Hanchuang and Lu Qiannia hurriedly followed after seeing this. They returned to the grandstand under the watch of the higher-ups of the various major powers. Lin Xuan returned to his seat. Only then did everyone withdraw their gazes and look at the remaining battles. However, the shocking scene from before was still lingering in their minds. The first round of chaotic battles continued. The other 4 arenas belonged to the 4 young masters. The top 4 geniuses of the Scorching Sun domain, when they saw the area where Lin Xuan was, the result of the match had already been decided. As master-level geniuses, they were naturally unwilling to fall behind. They didn't wait any longer but took the initiative to attack. Feng Yuanli Flaming Palm. Cloud Soaring Sword Technique. Flames fill the sky. The 4 young masters were worthy of being called a spiritual essence stage. Once they attacked, no one could stop them. In just a breath's time, they had eliminated more than half of the warriors in the arena. Only less than 10 people remained. Very quickly, the results for the 4 arenas were decided. All 4 of them advanced. Most of them were disciples of the Yang Essence sect, Wind Flame Valley, and the royal family of Red Flame Country. In addition, there was also Sun Yuan and another disciple who didn't belong to the 8 major powers. After that, the judge announced the result. The crowd was filled with emotions again. No one had expected this to happen in this year's competition. Due to Lin Xuan's sudden appearance, the fighting spirit of the 4 young masters was ignited. This actually allowed the first round to end ahead of time. This was much earlier than before. However, although the 4 young masters had made their move this time, they had also displayed their astonishing strength. However, compared to Lin Xuan, they were still slightly weaker. Although they had defeated more than 50 participants in one move, but previously, on the 5th stage, Lin Xuan's palm hadn't even been used in martial arts, spirit energy, or concept. As for the 4 young masters, they all used martial arts and spiritual essence. In comparison, it was clear who was better. Everyone was once again shocked by Lin Xuan's strength. At the same time, everyone was looking forward to the upcoming battle, even more. Especially the collision between Lin Xuan and the 4 young masters. No one knew who would win. On the east side of the platform, the Grand Elder from the Yang Essence sect saw what was happening and stood up. He jumped down from the grandstand and landed on Arena 3. He looked around the scene and paused on Lin Xuan for a while before saying in a clear voice, "The competition for the spots is the Scorching Sun region competition." The first round, the chaotic battle, had come to an end. Ranking list: Zhang Yukan, Chen Feng, Zhou Wenha, Wu Xin, and Lin Xuan. 20 people. They would also be able to take part in the Profound Essence List ranking competition. At the same time, they would also receive a generous reward from the 8 major powers. Congratulations to them. As soon as he finished his words, a huge round of applause was heard. Everyone's gaze landed on the 20 people. Most of them were focused on Lin Xuan and the 4 young masters. Chapter 212. The real person values him. In today's qualifier contest, these 5 are the real stars. The rest were only supporting roles. Everyone's eyes focused on the 20 people who had advanced. On the tall platform to the south, the major powers of Kangyuan country were also quite happy. In the past, it was already considered fairly good for Kangyuan country to get a spot. 20 spots were basically occupied by the 3 major powers of Red Flame country. They couldn't do anything about the fact that Red Flame country was more than a level stronger than Kangyuan country. The true disciples of the 3 major powers of Red Flame country were the 3rd and 4th disciples, and they were all much stronger than the chief successor disciple, who was one of the 5 major powers of Kangyuan country. This was a clear proof of this. And this year, they had obtained 4 spots. This was already a pleasant surprise. Especially the Drifting Cloud sect, Hangshu sect, and the 3 major powers in the Kangyuan country who had obtained the quotas. All of them were extremely happy. They couldn't help but look at Lin Xuan. At the same time, they secretly sighed in their hearts. Among the 4 spots, Lin Xuan obtained 3 of them as soon as he opened his mouth. He appeared to be incomparably domineering. He wasn't any weaker than the 4 young masters. All the major powers were secretly sighing for him. The Drifting Cloud sect and even the Kangyuan country were really lucky to have a top genius like Lin Xuan. In the future, they would rely on Lin Xuan to rise up. On the Red Flame country side, the eyes of the higher-ups of the three major powers were also focused on Lin Xuan. All of them were shocked. Lin Xuan's performance today was even more outstanding than the four young masters. They couldn't help but guess. Lin Xuan's talent was so high that it was highly likely that he had surpassed the four young masters. He was the true number one genius of the Scorching Sun domain. A sense of crisis appeared in their hearts. However, when they thought about how Lin Xuan was only at the 8th level of the spirit opening stage, he had yet to reach the peak of the spirit opening stage. There was no need to talk about the spiritual essence stage. They were slightly relieved. They felt extremely fortunate in their hearts. Even though Lin Xuan was extremely talented, his current strength shouldn't be a threat to the four young masters. After all, although Lin Xuan was extremely talented, the four young masters were still top geniuses. Within the spiritual essence stage, all of them could jump realms and challenge others. Furthermore, there was a huge gap between them and Lin Xuan. It wasn't easy to make up for such a huge gap. On Arena 3, after the Grand Elder from the Yang Essence sect announced the result, he paused for a moment. He looked at Huiyuan Zhenren, who was standing at the center of the tall platform in the east. At this moment, Huiyuan Zhenren was still lazily leaning against the chair. He was drinking the spiritual wine and showed no signs of getting up. He could not help but feel shocked in his heart. After that, he withdrew his gaze and continued speaking in a clear voice. Next is the second round of the Scorching Sun region competition. A duel between two opponents. Until the top 10. The list was jointly drafted by the upper echelons of the 8 major powers to ensure fairness. Let's begin. After saying that, he turned around and walked towards the tall platform in the east. On the 5 rings, the mid-spiritual essence, stage elder judge of the Yang Essence sect jumped onto the ring. Each of them had a name list in their hands. They read aloud: Arena number 1, Wuxin vs Zhang Qishan. Arena number 2, Sun Yuan vs Lu Qianya. Arena 3, Zhou Wenhe vs Duan Fakin. The 5 rings were competing at the same time. Only 10 matches were needed to decide the top 10. There are 2 matches in each arena. The people whose names were called out by the top 20 disciples walked down from the stands and walked towards the arena. When the upper echelons of the various powers heard this, their expressions froze and their eyes revealed extreme disbelief. But their gazes weren't looking at the disciples that were about to fight. Instead, they were looking at Huiyuan Zhenren, who was standing at the top of the tall platform in the east. They all knew that Huiyuan Zhenren was the one who was sent by the major powers of the Maple Martial region to preside over the competition. His horizons were extremely high and he didn't put the people of the Scorching Sun domain in his eyes at all. In the past few years, Huiyuan Zhenren has been in charge of the competition. However, every time he came, he would arrive after the first round of chaotic battles ended and 20 spots would be decided. After he recorded the results and gave out the competition token, he stood up and flew away. After that, he would no longer pay attention to the Scorching Sun region competition. He had been like this for the past few years. But now, Huiyuan Zhenren did not leave after deciding on the spots. He stayed behind. This was the complete opposite of before. Everyone was shocked and their bodies trembled. At the same time, their minds were rapidly thinking. Didn't Huiyuan Zhenren look down on all the warriors of Scorching Sun domain? Why was his behavior abnormal this time? Could it be that, in this competition, the one who was valued by Huiyuan Zhenren chose to stay? But in this competition, the 4 young masters were still the same 4 people as before. The rest of them were far from being as good as the 4 young masters. Why didn't Huiyuan Zhenren stop in the last competition? Wait. In an instant, a bolt of lightning flashed across the minds of the higher-ups. They suddenly understood. They had also missed out on one person. That was Lin Xuan, who had recently appeared out of nowhere and was not much weaker than the 4 young masters. He was reputed to be the 5th master-level genius of the Scorching Sun domain. Apart from the 4 young masters, Lin Xuan was the most talented genius in the entire Scorching Sun domain. Could it be that Huiyuan Zhenren was really left behind because of Lin Xuan? When the higher-ups of the various major powers thought of this, their hearts couldn't help but jump. They looked at Lin Xuan in shock. If that was really the case, then Lin Xuan was the #1 genius of Scorching Sun domain, not Zhang Yuqin. Immediately, the higher-ups of the major powers were even more shocked. Zhang Yuqin was already a genius ranked in the Profound Essence list. If Lin Xuan's talent was higher than Zhang Yuqin's, wouldn't that mean he was at least a genius, or perhaps even higher? Two geniuses would appear in the Scorching Sun domain. The higher-ups of the various major powers were shocked, and they were all deeply shocked. They didn't even have the mood to watch the matches in the other arenas below. The higher-ups of the major powers could think of the situation, and so could the four young masters. The four of them clenched their fists secretly. Their eyes swept across Lin Xuan, and a fighting spirit surged in their eyes. In a while, they would use their own strength to prove to Huyu and Zhenren who the strongest genius of Scorching Sun domain was. At the highest point of the eastern stands, Huyu and Zhenren was lazily drinking the spiritual wine, looking casual. However, no one noticed that when his gaze swept past Lin Xuan, a sharp light flashed in the depths of his eyes. Lin Xuan. What a strong foundation. He is considered a top genius even in the central region. Not many people can compare with him. He actually appeared in a small domain like the Scorching Sun domain. This is really strange. Could it be because of the arrival of 1,000 years and the emergence of all the peerless geniuses and peerless geniuses on the Tinyuana continent? So even a small domain like the Scorching Sun domain can produce a genius like him? I don't understand. However, after the Scorching Sun domain discovers him, I estimate that he will be able to enter the top 60 of the Profound Essence list, or even the top 50. This is really a pleasant surprise. This time, I have finally gained something. On the high platform in the south, Lin Xuan sat in his original position. This second round's first match wasn't his turn. He just waited quietly. At this time, his expression suddenly froze as he looked at void in front of him. Chapter 213. Go on. Congratulations. You have obtained the shocking energy of an Origin C Realm Level 1 warrior, Zhongxing, plus 10,000. Congratulations on obtaining Spiritual Essence Stage Peak Warrior, Duanjunia's shocking energy of plus 8,000. He saw the energy points in the attribute panel in the void in front of him suddenly increase at an extremely fast speed. In just a moment, it had increased by hundreds of thousands and millions. What's going on? Why did it suddenly increase by so much? Lin Xuan also did not expect such a scene. He swept his gaze around. Very quickly, Lin Xuan discovered the reason. Is it because of that Huyu and Zhenren? These energy points were also provided by the upper echelons of the various large factions. I never thought that Huyu and Zhenren's attention would cause such a huge commotion amongst the higher-ups of the Scorching Sun domain. Sure enough, the Scorching Sun domain is still too small. A late elemental C stage Huyu and Zhenren can be so powerful in Scorching Sun domain. Lin Xuan sighed in his heart. This further strengthened his desire to go out and train after this trip to the Scorching Sun region competition. After that, he no longer paid attention to the energy points. Since there were a large number of energy points in his account, of course he would gladly accept them. The competition continued. In the second round, he made it into the top 10. The outcome of the first 5 battles was decided not long after. When the 4 young masters entered the arena, all their opponents took the initiative to admit defeat. They didn't even need to fight. Duan Fakin was also unlucky. He had met one of the 4 young masters, Zhou Wenha. He was defeated on the spot, unable to advance. In the second ring, Sun Yuan was fighting Lu Qiannia. The result was that Lu Qiannia won with great difficulty. This surprised all the higher-ups in Kangyuan country. One should know that, before Lin Xuan, Sun Yuan was ranked first on the potential roll of Kangyuan country. He was the #1 genius of the Kangyuan country. Lu Qiannia, on the other hand, fell behind Chen Hanchuang and was ranked third. And now, Lu Qiannia has actually defeated Sun Yuan. And during this period of time, it had only been 10 days. Lu Qiannia's progress was so great that even the higher-ups of the Kangyuan country couldn't believe it. After the referee announced the result, Lu Qiannia and Sun Yuan returned to their seats on the south viewing platform. Sun Yuan looked at Lu Qiannia unwillingly. This time, after the Scorching Sun region competition obtained a spot, The second round of the competition was leukemia. He originally thought that his luck was not bad and that he would be able to advance into the top 10. But in the end, he lost to leukemia. How could he dare to believe it? Leukemia ignored Sun Yuan and looked at Lin Xuan, who was not far away, and said gratefully, "I still have to thank senior brother Lin for the medicinal pill." At this moment, leukemia was really excited. He was also incredibly grateful to Lin Xuan. He had never thought that he would be able to defeat Sun Yuan, who had always been a strong enemy. He now thought that it should be the 3-pattern pill given by Lin Xuan that allowed his strength to increase by a large margin in a brief period of time. Only then could he defeat Sun Yuan. Although the top 10 was already the limit, he had to stop. However, obtaining a spot was his biggest goal. Now under Lin Xuan's protection, not only was he able to obtain a spot easily, but he had also even defeated his earlier opponent, Sun Yuan, and advanced into the top 10. This had already greatly exceeded his expectations. And these were all brought in by Lin Xuan. He was naturally incredibly grateful to Lin Xuan. On the grandstand, the expressions of the higher-ups, disciples, and Sun Yuan of the other 4 major powers changed upon seeing this. The reason leukemia was able to defeat Sun Yuan with such strength was because of Lin Xuan. Everyone was somewhat in disbelief. However, when they thought about Lin Xuan's legendary rise, it seemed like this was not impossible. Everyone was once again shocked by Lin Xuan. At the same time, their eyes were filled with envy. The Drifting Cloud sect was able to recruit a top genius like Lin Xuan. It was estimated that the Drifting Cloud sect's rise wasn't far away. When Lin Xuan heard this, he just nodded his head lightly as a response. A few days ago, when he was refining pills and selling them in the Drifting Cloud sect, he thought about the 2 months of care the Drifting Cloud sect had given him. Moreover, it was highly likely that he would leave after the Scorching Sun region competition. He had given leukemia some 3-pattern pills. Now, it seemed like leukemia was indeed the #1 genius of the Drifting Cloud sect in the past. Leukemia's cultivation base and strength had improved a lot. He had become a top genius in Kangyuan country, except for Lin Xuan. He estimated that leukemia would break through to the spiritual essence stage very soon. After that, he no longer paid any attention to leukemia. Arena 3, Lin Xuan vs. Zhou Wenji. At this moment, the judge's voice was heard. This time, it was Lin Xuan's turn. Lin Xuan stood up and walked towards the ring. When everyone heard this, they all looked over. Lin Xuan's reputation had been boosted. He was reputed to be the 5th master-level genius of Scorching Sun domain. His performance in the last chaotic battle was even more spectacular. Lin Xuan alone had defeated more than half of the contestants in the 5th ring. His strength was probably not much weaker than that of the 4 young masters. Naturally, he attracted the attention of everyone present. However, in the last chaotic battle, most of them only saw the scene of over 50 spirit opening stage warriors being sent flying, but they didn't pay attention to the power of Lin Xuan's attack. They felt rather regretful. And now it was Lin Xuan's turn. His opponent wasn't bad either. Zhou Wenji was second only to the crown prince, Zhou Wenha, in the royal family of Red Flame country. In the entire Scorching Sun domain, he was second only to the 4 young masters. His cultivation base had reached the peak of the spirit opening stage, and he wasn't far from the spiritual essence stage. It was the perfect time for them to see Lin Xuan's strength. Theoretically speaking, Lin Xuan would definitely win this battle. However, it was already considered rather good that they could see Lin Xuan's true strength. The spectators were all extremely interested. Even the higher-ups of the major powers were looking forward to Lin Xuan's performance. Due to the importance Huyu and Zenrin attached to Lin Xuan, everyone started paying attention to him. Soon, the 2 of them arrived at the arena and stood opposite each other. Opposite Lin Xuan, Zhou Wenji was wearing a white robe. Lin Xuan looked at Zhou Wenji. Zhou Wenji's attribute panel appeared in front of him. Zhou Wenji and Duan Fakin were similar. I consumed 200,000 energy points. Duplicated successfully. Obtained profound grade cultivation talent. Was the only talent Lin Xuan was interested in. He casually copied it over. Immediately, he chose to use it. A weak, warm current flowed through his body. As for his cultivation talent, it had already reached the crystal grade. If he merged with another profound grade, there wouldn't be any chi fluctuations. After that, Lin Xuan's expression returned to normal as he waited. The judge glanced at Lin Xuan and Zhou Wenji, and a look of anticipation flashed across his eyes. He then announced, "The competition begins." Chapter 214. The Power of the Palm. As the referee finished speaking, the field turned silent. Almost everyone's eyes were focused on the Arena 3. Although there were still duels going on in the other rings, almost no one paid attention to them. There was no comparison between them and Lin Xuan on the arena. Zhou Wenji looked at Lin Xuan with a solemn expression. He cupped his hands and said, "Lin, please show mercy." Although he did not see Lin Xuan's performance in the previous match, he knew that he was no match for Lin Xuan after hearing the news about Lin Xuan. However, he was the top genius of Scorching Sun domain. It was impossible for him to admit defeat. He could only fight with all his might. After saying that, Zhou Wenji attacked. The power of a peak spirit opening stage was unleashed. Several concepts were unleashed. A sharp light shot up into the sky, cutting the surrounding air into pieces in an instant. Spiritual energy crazily surged, and the sword in his hand trembled slightly. He had already used his full strength. Many of the spectators in the plaza were forced to retreat. This momentum was almost on par with Spiritual Essence Stage Level 1. All the spectators nodded their heads slightly. He was indeed worthy of being the top genius of the Scorching Sun domain, second only to the 4 young masters. His strength was indeed extraordinary. And how would Lin Xuan deal with his attack? Everyone wanted to know. Their eyes fell on Lin Xuan. Lin Xuan stood on the spot with a calm expression, as if nothing had happened. The aura that was extremely close to the Spiritual Essence stage seemed to have no effect on him at all, as if it didn't exist at all. Looking at this scene, everyone was stunned. They could even feel that Lin Xuan's strength was unfathomable. They were looking forward to this competition even more. As expected, it should be Lin Xuan who wins. And how long could Zhou Wenji last? Could he force Lin Xuan to use his true strength? Everyone was looking forward to it in their hearts. On the arena, Zhou Wenji saw Lin Xuan's indifferent expression. He faintly felt that he seemed to have underestimated Lin Xuan. But at this moment, he had no time to think about it. Cloud soaring sword technique. He shouted in a deep voice and slashed out with his sword. The sound of air being torn could be heard continuously. Dozens of sword lights flew out and turned into clouds, flying towards Lin Xuan. This attack seemed peaceful, but it was full of killing intent. These sword beams seemed slow, but they were actually amazingly fast. This was the white cloud sword art passed down from the royal family of Red Flame Country. Soon, dozens of white clouds floated above Lin Xuan. The cold killing intent caused the temperature in the air to drop drastically. With the enhancement of several concepts, the power increased exponentially. If an ordinary peak spirit opening stage were to face any of the white clouds, they would be instantly killed. Under the encirclement of these dozens of white clouds, even an early Spiritual Essence stage wouldn't be able to withstand it easily. This was Zhou Wenji's strongest attack. Zhou Wenji knew that his own strength couldn't be compared to Lin Xuan's, so he didn't dare to hold back. In the next moment, dozens of white cloud sword lights descended towards Lin Xuan. It was as if the void had been pierced through. Below, Lin Xuan's expression remained calm. For you to be able to unleash such a powerful attack, you are considered pretty good amongst spirit opening stage warriors. Lin Xuan commented. After that, he attacked. This time, the Scorching Sun region competition wasn't difficult for him at all. He had come here to obtain the energy points, and to replicate some treasures. In order to ensure that he would be able to obtain the greatest amount of energy points, he had to wait for Zhou Wenji to unleash his strongest attack. After that, he would defeat Zhou Wenji. At this moment, it was time. He struck out with his palm. This palm strike was the same as the palm strike used in the chaotic battle of Lin Xuan's first battle. Lin Xuan did not use any martial arts, concepts, or spirit energy. He only used pure physical strength. Moreover, he only used half of his strength. But even so, its power was shocking enough. In an instant, it was as if a huge level 9 wind had been stirred up, and a piercingly cold whistling sound could be heard throughout the entire square. A terrifying aura gushed out like endless waves, spreading in all directions. Its power was simply irresistible. Cracking sounds could be heard as if even the void could not withstand it. In an instant, the dozens of white cloud sword beams that Zhou Wenji slashed out touched the force of Lin Xuan's palm. But right after that, a bone-chilling sound was continuously heard. The dozens of white cloud sword beams that Zhou Wenji sent out with all his strength were actually as fragile as biscuits. In an instant, they shattered and dissipated. Zhou Wenji did not have the slightest ability to resist. How is this possible? Zhou Wenji's eyes widened when he saw this scene. He cried out in shock, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. He attacked with all his strength, along with all of his most powerful martial arts and concepts. He madly relied on his spirit energy to slash out with his sword. Its power was so strong that even an early spiritual essence stage wouldn't be able to withstand this attack easily. In his opinion, even if he couldn't defeat Lin Xuan, if Lin Xuan wanted to receive this attack, he would need to spend a lot of energy. But at this moment, his strongest attack was easily countered by Lin Xuan's palm. The gap between them was as big as a ravine. He had lost all his confidence. The crowd was stunned too. Zhou Wenji had never thought that this would be the result. This time, Lin Xuan had revealed his true strength. Lin Xuan was much stronger than they had imagined. Everyone was also overly excited about Lin Xuan's strength. They were unable to calm down for a long time. Even the four young masters had a solemn expression on their faces. They didn't dare underestimate Lin Xuan anymore. Even if Lin Xuan was only an 8th level of spirit opening stage, they were all spiritual essence stage warriors on the arena. Lin Xuan's palm pushed out a terrifying force. After shattering the dozens of white cloud sword beams that Zhou Wenji had sent out, it didn't weaken by even a little bit. Instead, it continued forward. It used its unstoppable momentum to crush Zhou Wenji. Not good. Zhou Wenji sensed danger. He could not help but feel nervous and break out in a cold sweat. He intuitively knew that he would not be able to make this move. Lin Xuan had merely used a casual palm strike to shatter his strongest attack. He even counterattacked. With Lin Xuan's strength, he was probably not any weaker than an ordinary early spiritual essence stage warrior. He was also shocked by Lin Xuan's formidable strength. But at this moment, he had no time to think about it. Because the terrifying force of Lin Xuan's palm was just too fast. He had no time to block it, let alone escape. It had already arrived. In an instant, Zhou Wenji felt a sharp pain coming from his chest, and his vision turned black. Chapter 215. Top 10. Suddenly, Zhou Wenji felt as if he had been smashed by a huge rock. He flew backwards, drawing an arc in the air, and crashed into the square hundreds of meters away. His body was covered in blood, and his breath was weak. He was already heavily injured. On the arena, Lin Xuan slowly withdrew his palm. His expression was indifferent. It was as if he had just done something insignificant. The audience in the arena fell silent when they saw this scene. Not long after, they began to discuss it animatedly. Zhou Wenji was defeated just like that. He was defeated by Lin Xuan in an instant. Lin Xuan is indeed the 5th master level genius of Scorching Sun domain. He is too strong. He is not much weaker than the other 4 young masters, right? He's still at the spirit opening stage. This means that Lin Xuan's talent might be even greater than the 4 young masters. It seems like our Scorching Sun domain is going to produce another Heaven's Pride expert. Everyone was discussing it in astonishment. Their eyes were fixed on Lin Xuan, and their hearts were filled with extreme shock. With Lin Xuan's astonishing battle record, everyone knew that Lin Xuan would be the winner of this match. The only suspense was how long Zhou Wenji could last. In their opinion, although Zhou Wenji would be defeated in the end, he could still last more than 10 moves. Zhou Wenji was not much weaker than Lin Xuan. He was the 2nd greatest junior disciple of the Red Flame country's royal family. In Scorching Sun domain, he was only 2nd to the top geniuses of the 4 young masters. He had a record of being able to last more than 10 rounds under the hands of an early spiritual essence stage warrior. However, Zhou Wenji did not expect that after he used his strongest attack. Lin Xuan had destroyed Zhou Wenji's attack with a single strike. He even counterattacked and sent Zhou Wenji flying, severely injuring him and causing him to fall to the ground. This was a single strike to defeat the enemy. The gap between them was so huge that it seemed like they were not on the same level. It wasn't that Lin Xuan's cultivation base was lower than Zhou Wenji's. Everyone looked at the scene from afar in shock. They couldn't accept it. Lin Xuan's strength was much stronger than that of those early spiritual essence stage warriors. As for Lin Xuan, his cultivation base was only at the 8th level of spirit opening stage. He wasn't even at the peak of the 8th level of spirit opening stage. This also showed how strong his talent was. He was more than a grade stronger than the 4 young masters, right? If this were the case, wouldn't Lin Xuan be the number 1 genius of the Scorching Sun domain? The number 1 genius wasn't Zhang Yuqin. Everyone was even more shocked when they thought of this. They were shocked by Lin Xuan's terrifying talent. On the surrounding stands, 4 young masters' eyes fell upon Lin Xuan. Their expressions were very solemn. It was obvious that Lin Xuan hadn't used his true strength in this battle. He had severely injured Zhou Wenji with just a casual strike. His power had already surpassed the spirit opening stage and had reached the spiritual essence stage. As for Lin Xuan's attack, they could also see some clues about it. This was obviously a very ordinary palm strike. He didn't even use his martial art, true chi, or concept. He only used his physical strength. Even so, the power of his attack was still so shocking. His physical strength was even stronger than that of the 4 young masters and Zhang Yuqin. Although they didn't know whether the strength of his physique was Lin Xuan's strongest attack or not, there was no doubt that Lin Xuan was hiding more than half of his strength. He wasn't much weaker than them. Lin Xuan was only an 8th level of spirit opening stage, and he was 1 major realm lower than them, plus several minor realms. They were secretly shocked by Lin Xuan's talent. At least, when they were at the spirit opening stage, their strength wasn't as strong as Lin Xuan's. At the same time, their hearts were heavy. If they lost to Lin Xuan like this, they would lose all their faces as the 4 young masters. However, they didn't have much confidence in winning against Lin Xuan. They could only try their best. They did not dare to underestimate Lin Xuan anymore. At the top of the eastern platform, Huyu and Zenren glanced at Lin Xuan and smiled even more. He nodded slightly. On the arena, Lin Xuan looked at the energy points that were continuously increasing in the attribute panel in front of him, and a trace of a smile flashed across his eyes. Not bad this time. This was the effect he wanted. After that, he put away the attribute panel and looked at the judge. The judge was stunned. He only reacted when he felt Lin Xuan's gaze. He glanced at Lin Xuan with a complicated expression. He did not expect the competition to end so quickly. Lin Xuan was extraordinarily strong. He might not even be able to defeat Lin Xuan. Lin Xuan must be a formidable opponent for the genius of the sect, Zhang Yuqin. However, he remembered that Lin Xuan was only at the 8th level of spirit opening stage, not even at the peak of the 8th level of spirit opening stage. There was still a long way to go before he could reach the spiritual essence stage. As for Zhang Yuqin, he was at the 2nd level of spiritual essence stage, and he could even fight opponents who were stronger than him. He wasn't much weaker than many mid-spiritual essence stage warriors. Even he wasn't a match for Zhang Yuqin. He heaved a sigh of relief. After that, he announced it with a clear voice. Lin Xuan has won this match, and he has advanced into the top 10. As soon as he finished speaking, another wave of clamorous noise arose in the arena. Lin Xuan had used this chance to obtain a wave of energy points. He jumped off the stage and walked back to his seat under the gazes of almost everyone on the stage. The second round of the competition continued. Time passed like water. Unknowingly, dozens of minutes had passed. In the second round, there were only 10 matches to decide the top 10. Not long after, all the matches were nearing their end, and they were all over. In the entire Kangyuan country, only Lin Xuan and Lu Qiannia had advanced to the top 10. Chen Hanchuang and Sun Yuan had been eliminated. Both of them were disciples of the Drifting Cloud sect, which made the other organizations feel that the status of the Drifting Cloud sect had improved. As for the disciple who entered the top 20, he wasn't a disciple of the 8 major powers. He was eliminated. The remaining 8 people in the top 10 were disciples of the 3 big organizations in Red Flame Country. This allowed everyone to see the strength of Red Flame Country. It was far from being comparable to the other organizations in Kangyuan Country. On the tall platform in the east, the Grand Elder from the Yang Essence sect landed on Arena 3 once again. He surveyed the entire scene and said, "The second round has ended. Zhang Yukan, Chen Feng, Zhou Wenhe, Wu Xin, and Lin Xuan have advanced to the top 10. Next was the third round. The contestants would fight in groups of 2, and the winner would advance to the top 5. I have decided on the name list. Let's start the competition." After he finished speaking, he jumped off the arena and returned to the eastern stands. The earlier 5 mid-spiritual essence stage judges each jumped onto their respective arenas and announced Arena number 1, Wu Xin vs. Lu Qianya, and Arena number 2, Zhang Yukan vs. Zhou Ran. Arena number 5, Lin Xuan vs. Chen Xing. As expected, Lin Xuan and the 4 young masters went on stage in 5 different arenas. However, none of them had met each other. Instead, they fought with the other 5. This was also to prevent Lin Xuan and the 4 young masters from fighting in advance. Everyone could understand this. They waited in silence. It wouldn't take long for the results of this round to be decided. The terribly exciting match would be the next round. Chapter 216. Lin Xuan's Judgment. Sure enough, the third round ended in a few minutes. Lin Xuan, who had the combat strength of a spiritual essence stage, and the 4 young masters who had the strength of a spiritual essence stage entered the arena. They were going to fight the other 5 spirit opening stage warriors. They naturally won with ease. Their opponent either admitted defeat or was defeated with a single strike. They easily ended the duel. The 4 young masters and Lin Xuan had advanced to the top 5. All of these were within everyone's expectations. No one was surprised. The Grand Elder from the Yang Essence sect once again came to Arena 3 and announced, "The third round of the competition has ended. Zhang Yukan, Chen Feng, Zhou Wenhe, Wu Xin, and Lin Xuan have advanced to the top 5. In the next 4th round, these 5 will compete for the top 3. After the discussion between the upper echelons of the 8 major powers, Zhang Yukan, as the champion of the last competition, automatically advanced to the top 3. Chen Feng vs. Wu Xin, Zhou Wenhe vs. Lin Xuan, the winners would advance to the top 3. These 2 duels would be carried out in Arena 3. I will be the judge for the next 2 rounds. The first match was Chen Feng vs. Wu Xin. Let's start the match." As soon as his words left his mouth, the entire arena became silent. Everyone's spirits were lifted. The 2 master-level geniuses were finally going to fight. No matter who won or lost, this would be one of the most exciting battles in the Scorching Sun region competition. Everyone was looking forward to it. On the northern and eastern sides of the platform, Chen Feng and Wu Xin stood up after hearing the news and walked towards the platform. Both of them were quite handsome, and they were both master-level geniuses. As soon as they entered the arena, they attracted the cheers of many female warriors. After the Grand Elder announced the start of the match, the 2 of them started fighting. The 2 of them were worthy of being called master-level geniuses. Not only were they spiritual essence stage warriors, but they were also able to fight opponents with higher cultivation levels than them. Even a mid-spiritual essence stage warrior would find it hard to defeat these 2. Both of them knew that this was the battle that would decide their advancement to the top 3, and they had used all of their strength. An intense battle erupted. However, the difference in strength between the 2 of them wasn't that great. After several minutes of intense battle, the winner was still uncertain. This made the spectators incredibly happy. On the southern arena, Lin Xuan looked at the battle in Arena 3 from afar with a cold expression. He watched for a while and was no longer interested. Although these 2 people were ranked in the 4 young masters and had the strength of a spiritual essence stage, if it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to obtain the greatest amount of energy points, he would have killed them with a single strike. This was meaningless. He couldn't be bothered to pay more attention to this match. He closed his eyes and started to understand the Golden Scale Barbaric Elephant Arts. Right now, Golden Scale Barbaric Elephant Arts is the strongest martial art in his body. This was the strongest manifestation of his current combat strength. Even the Nirvana Sword Art couldn't compare to the Golden Scale Barbaric Elephant Arts. Lin Xuan even had a vague feeling. If it were a complete version of the Golden Scale Barbaric Elephant Arts, it would far surpass the Nirvana Sword Art. About this Golden Scale Barbaric Elephant Arts with infinite potential, he naturally needed to put a lot of energy into it. After all, this was his strongest trump card, besides his spatial talent. Another half an hour passed. Lin Xuan opened his eyes again and looked at Arena 3. At this moment, the war in Arena 3 had yet to end, and it was still a tie. Chen Feng won. After saying that, he closed his eyes and continued to understand the golden scale barbaric elephant arts. Although his voice wasn't loud, the audience was quietly watching the competition in Arena 3. Lin Xuan, as an existence comparable to the four young masters in the southern stands, was about to take part in the next competition. Some people were distracted by Lin Xuan from time to time. Lin Xuan's words naturally spread out and were heard by the upper echelons and disciples of the various organizations in the southern stands. Immediately, many people shifted their gazes to Lin Xuan. What did Lin Xuan just say? Chen Feng would win. How did he know? Obviously, both of them were still in a fierce battle, and no one was at a disadvantage. They had yet to decide who would win, but could Lin Xuan decide who would win? Could it be that Lin Xuan's knowledge had also surpassed theirs? Everyone was incredibly surprised. Of course, many people revealed disdainful expressions. They admitted that Lin Xuan's talent was extremely high and his strength was formidable. However, Lin Xuan was just a young man. He could not surpass those old men in terms of knowledge. Was Lin Xuan trying to be sensationalized? Chen Feng and Wu Xin had not fought yet. In the four young masters, besides Zhang Yuqin, who was a genius, the other three had the same strength. They had yet to see anything unusual, but Lin Xuan was already able to decide who would win and who would lose. When the result was decided later, if Chen Feng couldn't win, Lin Xuan would be in an awkward situation. Immediately, everyone's eyes gathered on Arena 3. They wanted to see if Lin Xuan's judgment was correct. At this moment, there was still a great battle in the arena. But not long after, Chen Feng's qi increased once again. Wu Xin's qi became weaker. Under Chen Feng's wild attack, Wu Xin was at a disadvantage. In just a few minutes, Wu Xin was injured again and again, and his qi became weaker and weaker. After a while, he was sent flying by Chen Feng and landed outside the arena. The result of this match had been decided. And this match, as Lin Xuan had said, was Chen Feng's victory. Furthermore, they had been fighting for half an hour, and they were equally matched. However, after Lin Xuan finished speaking, the outcome of the match was decided in less than 7 minutes. Furthermore, Lin Xuan's judgment was completely correct. On the southern viewing platform, everyone's hearts were greatly shaken upon seeing this. They looked at Lin Xuan in disbelief. Lin Xuan's talent was extremely high, and his strength was formidable. He far surpassed the younger generation of disciples of Kangyuan country. Furthermore, his judgment was so correct that even the older generation couldn't compare with him. Everyone was shocked, and they couldn't calm down. Those who had disdained Lin Xuan earlier had ugly expressions on their faces. Lin Xuan had allowed the Drifting Cloud sect to rise and become stronger. The Drifting Cloud sect would be ranked at the top of the 5 major powers in Kangyuan country. However, the rise of the Drifting Cloud sect would certainly block the path of some other major powers. The Drifting Cloud sect had divided the benefits that should belong to them. There was nothing they could do about it. They naturally didn't have a good attitude towards Lin Xuan. They hoped that Lin Xuan would be defeated. However, Lin Xuan had proven his strength time and time again. Their faces were gloomy and unhappy. However, none of them dared to make it too obvious. They couldn't be noticed by Lin Xuan. Because the current Lin Xuan was already in existence, they couldn't afford to offend. Chapter 217. He fought with one of the 4 young masters. Lin Xuan, on the other hand, didn't pay any attention to this. He looked at the attribute panel in the void in front of him, and the energy points increased once again. He nodded slightly. The reason he made his judgment was to take advantage of the opportunity to obtain a wave of energy points. The reason he was able to make a correct judgment was because he had noticed the weak changes in Wu Xin and Chen Feng's halos. When he cultivated the golden scale barbaric elephant arts to the small success, what he obtained was not only his strong physique, but also his other abilities. For example, when it came to his senses, although he was still a late stage of spirit, opening stage warrior, his senses were so strong that even ordinary mid-spiritual essence, stage or late spiritual essence stage warriors might not be able to surpass him. It was because of this that he was able to judge who would win just by looking at the battle. Although Wu Xin and Chen Feng were fighting fiercely at that time, they were equally matched. However, Wu Xin was forcefully holding on. He was almost unable to hold on any longer. Chen Feng, on the other hand, was still in his peak condition. He could still hold on for a period of time. He made a correct judgment. And this time, not only did he want to obtain the energy points, but he also wanted to test his feeling. Now, it seemed that his feeling was indeed not bad. Lin Xuan's eyes revealed a trace of satisfaction. At this time, in Arena 3, the Grand Elder from the Yang Essence sect announced, next match, Zhou Wenhe vs Lin Xuan. As his words faded, the noisy square gradually quieted down. Many of the eyes on the square focused on Lin Xuan. This time, Lin Xuan had finally met a master-level genius. It was time to test his strength and see if he could really be compared to the four young masters. Everyone was looking forward to it. It was highly likely that this would be an exciting match that would not lose out to the earlier one. Lin Xuan and Zhou Wenhe stood up and walked towards the arena. Not long after, they arrived at the ring and stood opposite each other. Lin Xuan's eyes swept across Zhou Wenhe. His appearance was somewhat similar to Zhou Wenji's. However, this wasn't what Lin Xuan really cared about. He had an idea. In an instant, Zhou Wenhe's attribute panel appeared in his line of sight. Name, Zhou Wenhe. Cultivation, Spiritual Essence Stage Level 1. Talent, Profound Grade Cultivation Talent, Superior Grade Strength Talent, Spirit Grade Speed Talent, Superior Grade Swordplay Talent. Spirit Grade Violent Wind Attribute Talent, Spirit Grade Sharp Gold Talent, Superior Grade Crimson Fire Talent, and Top Grade Green Wood Attribute Talent. Top Grade Earth Talent, Top Grade Heavy Water Talent. Martial Arts, Cloud Soaring Technique, Low Rank 8, Small Completion, Cloud Soaring Sword Art, High Rank 7 Concept, 45% Sword Intent, 30% of the Artistic Conception of Gold, 40% of the Artistic Conception of Wind, 30% Artistic Conception of Fire, 20% Artistic Conception of Wood, 20% Artistic Conception of Earth, 20% Artistic Conception of Water. Treasure, Spirit Cloud Sword, High Rank 7 Spirit Weapon. Lin Xuan looked at Zhou Wenhe's attribute panel in front of him, and his expression changed slightly. Zhou Wenhe was indeed one of the four young masters of Scorching Sun domain. This attribute panel was the richest he had ever seen. Duan Fakin was slightly weaker than Zhou Wenhe. In the martial arts column, even Lu Wu was not as good as Zhou Wenhe. He actually has rank 8 martial arts. I think all three big organizations in Red Flame Country have a rank 8 martial arts inheritance. However, due to the lack of talent and limited cultivation resources of the other disciples, only one Origin C realm appeared. He is the sect leader of Yang Essence sect, Zhang Xing. Lin Xuan's eyes swept across Zhou Wenhe's attribute panel as he muttered in his heart. As for the treasures on the attribute panel, he liked them a lot. Of course, he wanted to obtain them. He had an idea. Consume 200,000 energy points and duplicate them successfully. You have obtained the Profound Grade Cultivation Talent. I consumed 200,000 energy points. Duplication successful. You have obtained the Cloud Soaring Technique, Low Rank, Small Completion. I consumed 100,000 energy points. Duplication successful. You have obtained the Spirit Cloud Sword, a high rank 7 spirit weapon. In the blink of an eye, he had duplicated all the treasures that he was interested in. Lin Xuan looked at the Grand Elder from the Yang Essence sect. As expected, Grand Elder's cultivation talent had also reached the profound grade, and he also had a rank 8 cultivation technique. However, he had yet to break through to the Origin C realm. Although theoretically, he could reach the Origin C realm. However, that was only a theory. There were still huge changes in reality. For example, the grade of martial arts was not high enough, the cultivation resources were lacking, or during training, the foundation was damaged, and so on and so forth. Lin Xuan had a long understanding of this. As for his other talents, they were much weaker than Zhou Wenhe's. However, some of his treasures were worth duplicating. Currently, Lin Xuan has as many as 10 million energy points. He could duplicate all of them. In total, it took less than a breath's time. Lin Xuan nodded slightly, and a hint of satisfaction appeared in his eyes. However, he couldn't absorb it right now. After all, Huiyuan Zhenren, who was at the late Elemental C stage, was watching him from afar. He didn't want to be discovered by Huiyuan Zhenren. Next, he had to defeat Zhou Wenha as soon as possible. Just like before, he waited for Zhou Wenha to attack first. After Zhou Wenha unleashed his strongest combat strength, he would defeat Zhou Wenha in one go. Only then would he be able to cause the greatest shock and obtain the most energy points that he obtained the most. Lin Xuan muttered in his heart. On the side, Grand Elder swept his gaze over the two of them and his eyes flickered as he announced. The competition begins. Immediately after, he turned around and jumped out of the arena. Even though the battle between these two people was unlikely to threaten him, if he were up there, it was still possible for him to disturb the battle between the two of them. It was better for him to stay away and watch the arena. Zhou Wenha looked at Lin Xuan and showed a gentle smile. He said, "I have long heard of your great name. I never thought that we would have a direct confrontation today. Please show mercy." Lin Xuan was a little surprised. Zhou Wenha, just like the rumors had said, carried a trace of refined aura and a trace of domineering aura. Lin Xuan replied with a faint smile. "I promise that today's battle will not affect your competition in a month's time." Zhou Wenha's words were very modest. However, Lin Xuan accepted it calmly. It was as if Lin Xuan would definitely win this match. The surrounding people were dumbfounded. Their hearts were filled with shock. Could it be that even Zhou Wenha was no match for Lin Xuan? Or could it be that Lin Xuan's winning streak had made him conceited? Everyone was guessing in their hearts. They didn't dare draw the conclusion on their own. Chapter 218. The sword light was shattered. On the stage, Zhou Wenha was startled. He was just being humble, but he didn't expect Lin Xuan to actually dare to fight. Could it be that Lin Xuan was only an 8th level of spirit opening stage, not even at the peak of the 8th level of spirit opening stage, and he was confident that he could defeat a spiritual essence stage like him? If that was really the case, then this Lin Xuan's talent was a bit too strong, wasn't it? At least, not to mention him, even Zhang Yukan couldn't compare to him. Zhou Wenha's heart was greatly shaken. He let out a few long breaths, and after calming himself down, he said, "Lin, please." Without saying anything else, he unleashed all of his spiritual essence, stage 1 power without holding anything back. In an instant, a gust of wind swept across the arena. However, the strange thing was that they seemed to have met an invisible barrier within a few meters of Lin Xuan. It could not advance an inch and it dissipated. This actually did not affect Lin Xuan in the slightest. This also proved that Lin Xuan's strength wasn't ordinary. Zhou Wenha's heart shivered when he saw this. He didn't dare underestimate Lin Xuan because of Lin Xuan's cultivation base. Cloud soaring sword technique. Zhou Wenha shouted in a deep voice. His spiritual essence surged, and he slashed out with his sword. A sword light flew out. It was extremely sharp, as if it could pierce through the void. At the same time, the 30% sword intent, 30% artistic conception of wind, and 20% artistic conception of gold, the three great concepts exploded with a loud bang. The sword light also increased at an extremely fast speed. It was as if it were above the clouds, looking down on the sky. It was extremely terrifying. It might spread in all directions, sweeping up terrifying aftershocks. It made the hearts of all the spectators who hadn't even reached the spiritual essence stage tremble, and they broke out in a cold sweat. Everyone felt as if a great terror had descended upon them, and they started to retreat. They retreated several hundred meters, and only then did they feel a little better. They looked at Zhou Wenha, who was standing in the arena, and were extremely shocked. Zhou Wenha's attack was so powerful. Even the aftershock of his attack was so powerful that none of them could withstand it. If they got any closer, they would be killed on the spot, wouldn't they? It was hard for them to imagine the true power of this sword attack. The spectators from the various factions nodded their heads slightly. The power of Zhou Wenha's sword strike had exceeded the spirit opening stage, and it had reached the spiritual essence stage. Furthermore, it was unlikely that any spiritual essence stage 1 would be able to withstand this attack. It wouldn't be easy for a second level of spiritual essence stage warrior to deal with this attack. Zhou Wenha was indeed worthy of being one of the 4 young masters of Scorching Sun domain. Zhou Wenha's strength wasn't any weaker than that of the older generation. After that, everyone's eyes fell upon Lin Xuan once again. In the face of such a powerful strike, how would Lin Xuan, who had only reached the 8th level of spirit opening stage, deal with it? Lin Xuan still had a calm expression on his face and he remained unmoved. In an instant, everyone was shocked. Could it be that such a technique wasn't worthy of Lin Xuan's attention? Everyone couldn't believe what they were seeing. At the same time, they were looking forward to this match even more. On the arena, after Zhou Wenha's three great concepts exploded, the power of the sword light reached its peak. The sword beam that was dozens of meters long descended from the sky, crushing down on Lin Xuan. It left a huge shadow on the arena, as if the sky were falling. On the other hand, Lin Xuan had a calm expression and shook his head slightly. Although this is the power of a spiritual essence stage, its power is still not enough. After that, he threw out a punch. This punch was the same as before. Lin Xuan didn't use his spiritual energy, concepts, or martial arts. It was just an ordinary punch, and it relied on his physical strength. But the strength it poured out was much greater than before. In an instant, Lin Xuan threw out a punch. The wind that was swept up by the sword radiance in the surroundings instantly shattered and dissipated. A terrifying force poured out and pierced through the void. It formed a fist imprint that was a few meters large and smashed towards the descending sword radiance. In terms of power, Lin Xuan's attack was completely incomparable to the sword light. However, when everyone saw this scene, none of them dared to underestimate Lin Xuan. In the next moment, everyone's attention was focused on that. The fist landed on the sword beam, which was dozens of meters long. An ear-splitting explosion rang out. The terrifying aftershock scattered in all directions, causing the spectators on the plaza to involuntarily retreat. They were even more shocked in their hearts. Even the surrounding spiritual essence stage warriors were shocked by the strength of the two people in the ring. This proved that Lin Xuan had the strength of a spiritual essence stage. Everyone was looking forward to the result of this match even more. They looked over at the arena. Fierce winds howled and the smoke and dust that filled the sky scattered. The scene in the arena appeared in front of everyone. In the sky, the sword radiance, which was several dozen zhong in size, had shrunk by more than 10 times. A translucent fist print that was only a few meters long was blocked in the air. The sword beam could no longer descend. Some mid-spiritual essence stage and above martial artists watched from afar. Their pupils couldn't help but shrink. A crisp sound was heard. The sword's radiance was actually covered in tiny cracks long ago. At this moment, the cracks were slowly getting bigger. In an instant, a terrifying explosion rang out. That sword light had actually exploded, creating an even more terrifying shockwave. Lin Xuan's fist only shrank by half, and he continued flying towards Zhou Wenha. How is this possible? Zhou Wenha couldn't help but cry out involuntarily when he saw this, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. Although he did not use his full strength in this strike, he had used more than half of his strength. Even a spiritual essence stage 3 wouldn't be able to withstand his attack with ease. However, Lin Xuan had blocked it with a casual punch. The punch had actually shattered the sword light. The fist flew towards him. The difference between them was too great. He couldn't believe it. But that sharp wind made his body involuntarily tremble. Even if he didn't want to believe it, he had no choice but to believe it. The scene in front of him was the truth. Only now did he realize that he had still underestimated Lin Xuan. Lin Xuan's strength was not any weaker than his. Lin Xuan might even be stronger than him. Suddenly, he was shocked by Lin Xuan's strength. However, at this moment, he couldn't think too much about it. Because the fist was already flying towards him. Although part of its power was blocked by his sword light, its remaining power was still at the spiritual essence stage. This made him feel like a great threat. If he couldn't deal with it seriously, he might be injured as well. The one he was facing was the unfathomable Lin Xuan. If he was injured, he would surely be defeated in this battle. Chapter 219. Great Battle. Cloud Soaring Sword Technique. Zhou Wenha shouted out loudly and thrust out his sword once again. An extremely sharp sword light flew out. It tore through the air and came crashing down. An ear-splitting sound of metal hitting metal was heard. The shrunken fist print was split in half. The sword's radiance was also broken in half. Zhou Wenha's expression changed. Damn it! What's going on? He could feel a tremendous force pouring out of his fist. He couldn't help but retreat. He was only able to stabilize his body after retreating 10 meters. However, Zhou Wenha's body was still trembling. He could not even hold the spirit cloud sword in his hand. Lin Xuan, on the other hand, looked calm and relaxed. He acted as if sending Zhou Wenha flying with a punch was just a small matter that was not worth mentioning. Everyone looked at the scene that happened in the arena. The arena turned silent. Immediately, a commotion broke out and the sound waves shook the entire area. Did I see wrongly? Zhou Wenha was actually sent flying by Lin Xuan's punch. Is this for real? Did he achieve such an effect with just one punch? Isn't Lin Xuan a little too strong? That's right. As one of the 4 young masters, even a spiritual essence stage level 3 might not be able to achieve this, right? It looks like Lin Xuan really has the strength of a master level. From now on, Lin Xuan will be the 5th young master of our Scorching Sun domain. He deserves it. Everyone was in an uproar. When their eyes gathered in the arena, they were also shocked and in disbelief. The power of Zhou Wenha's earlier sword strike had already reached the spiritual essence stage. Furthermore, it wasn't something a spiritual essence stage 1 could withstand. Even a spiritual essence stage 3 wouldn't be able to withstand it easily. But what about Lin Xuan? Not only did he shatter the sword light with a single punch, but he also sent Zhou Wenha flying 10 meters away. Everyone was shocked and couldn't calm down. This meant that Lin Xuan's strength had already surpassed the spirit opening stage and had reached the spiritual essence stage. Furthermore, he wasn't someone an ordinary early spiritual essence stage could compare with. Even if he wasn't as strong as a mid-spiritual essence stage, he wouldn't be too far off. As for Lin Xuan, his cultivation base was merely at the 8th level of spirit opening stage. He was one major realm and several minor realms away from the spiritual essence stage. However, Lin Xuan had such combat strength. This was a sign of his terrifying talent. Perhaps even the number 1 genius of the Scorching Sun domain, Zhang Yuqin, could not compare to Lin Xuan. Putting other things aside, even when Zhang Yuqin was at the peak of the spirit opening stage, he was still far from being able to do such a thing. Lin Xuan's performance had already earned him the reputation of being the number 1 genius of the Scorching Sun domain. When everyone thought of this, they were extremely shocked. The gazes of the other 3 young masters turned incomparably solemn as they looked at Lin Xuan. On the tall platform in the east, the higher-ups of the Yang Essence sect were also shocked by Lin Xuan's strength and talent. Only Huiyuan Zhenren remained calm. A trace of surprise could be seen in his eyes. His physique is a little strong. Even in the central region, there were only a few people who could be compared to him at the same level. Lin Xuan's talent for strength is definitely not low. He did not expect to find such a genius in the Scorching Sun domain. This trip was not in vain. Huiyuan Zhenren sighed with emotion, and his eyes revealed some interest in the arena. Zhou Wenha looked at Lin Xuan, and his expression was incomparably solemn. After sensing the power of Lin Xuan's punch, he no longer dared to underestimate Lin Xuan. Especially the tremendous force that was like an endless flood, it made his body tremble slightly. However, it was impossible to make him admit defeat. As a master-level genius, he would only lose and not admit defeat. Zhou Wenha at once said it in a cold voice. Lin Xuan, your strength is much stronger than I expected. However, don't think that you can defeat me. That sword strike is not my true strength. Then let me see your true strength. Lin Xuan replied in a deep voice. However, his expression remained calm without any change. All right. Zhou Wenha replied. In an instant, his power increased by another 30%. His original 3 great concepts had also become stronger. 45% sword intent, 30% half-artistic conception of gold, and 40% artistic conception of wind. The 3 concepts had been pushed to the limit, and Zhou Wenha didn't hold back at all. Within his danshan, the spiritual essence was crazily surging. Zhou Wenha shouted. Lin Xuan, this sword was originally prepared for Zhang Yuqin. I didn't expect it to be used on you first. If you can take this attack, I will admit defeat. Come on. Lin Xuan replied coldly. Ling Yun empty space destruction. Zhou Wenha didn't say anything else. He shouted in a deep voice, clenched his fists, and slashed down with his sword. A cold sword light flew out, and then it expanded at an extremely fast speed. With the enhancement of the three great concepts, it instantly became several hundred feet tall. Its power was far surpassed before, bringing with it layers upon layers of boundless airwaves. This was Zhou Wenha's strongest attack. After the earlier strike, Zhou Wenha knew that it would be useless no matter how much he tried to test Lin Xuan's strength. He had unleashed his strongest attack. The outcome of this match would depend on this attack. Its power dispersed, causing the spectators to retreat again and again. Their hearts were even more shaken. Even many spiritual essence stage warriors on the surrounding grandstands were unable to breathe due to the pressure. Their eyes were stinging, and they couldn't even stand to watch the battle. The spiritual essence stage elders beside them only helped them recover, a little after sending out their aura to help them. They couldn't help but feel shocked in their hearts. In their hearts, they were even more shocked by Zhou Wenha's strength. The power of this sword strike was probably not something that even mid-spiritual essence stage warriors could easily withstand. But Zhou Wenha was only a spiritual essence. Stage 1 he could already unleash a strike that was close to that of a mid-spiritual essence stage warrior. In the spiritual essence stage, he could even defeat a warrior 2 levels higher than him or a warrior at level 3. Zhou Wenha was indeed worthy of being one of the 4 young masters. As expected, he was not someone ordinary warriors could compare with. But how would Lin Xuan deal with Zhou Wenha's sword attack? Would he be able to withstand his attack as smoothly as before? Everyone was looking forward to it. Their eyes were fixed on the ring. And on the arena. Lin Xuan looked at the huge sword light that was dozens of meters tall and could almost split the entire ring into 2. His expression became serious. The 4 young masters really lives up to its reputation. But this is still not enough. Lin Xuan murmured in a deep voice. He shook his head and attacked. He still threw a punch. Tyrant fist. The only difference was that he used martial arts this time. However, he still didn't use his spirit energy or concept. Chapter 220. A terrifying punch. In fact, with Lin Xuan's true strength, he was able to defeat Zhang Yuqin with a single punch when he only used his physical strength. However, Lin Xuan did not want to reveal too much of his strength at the moment. His punch used martial arts. In an instant, a violent fist force surged out, turning into a fist print that was a few meters long and flying out. At the same time, a domineering aura appeared. Lin Xuan seemed to have become an invincible overlord. His power was terrifying. Even the force of Zhou Wenha's all-out attack had stopped. He couldn't get within 10 meters of Lin Xuan. In the next moment, Lin Xuan's fist landed on the huge sword light. The first light was only a few meters wide, far smaller than the sword light. However, the power of the first light was even stronger. Instantly, a terrifying, explosive sound spread out. Circles of visible shock waves spread out in all directions. Even second-level spiritual essence stage spectators couldn't withstand this power. They felt their eardrums hurt, and the vitality rolled. They almost couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. The surrounding upper echelons of the various major powers hurriedly blocked the shock waves. Only then did everyone recover. Everyone looked at the 2 people in the arena even more shocked. The shock waves from their battle alone were already so powerful. They couldn't imagine Lin Xuan's strength. Their eyes once again focused on the ring. Lin Xuan still had an indifferent expression, but Zhou Wenha's expression changed dramatically. In the sky, Lin Xuan's fist once again blocked Zhou Wenha's huge sword light. The sword light was covered with cracks that looked like spider webs. An ear-splitting explosion was heard. Zhou Wenha's huge sword light had shattered. The sword light turned into spiritual energy and dissipated. Lin Xuan's fist, which was emitting a domineering aura, didn't slow down at all. It continued flying towards Zhou Wenha. Wherever it went, the surrounding air was instantly crushed into powder. Its power was terrifying. Zhou Wenha couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. The huge sword beam that he unleashed with all his strength was shattered, causing him to suffer a backlash. In an instant, he suffered a severe injury. He looked at Lin Xuan, and his face was filled with shock. How can you be so strong? He would never have thought that after he used his strongest sword technique. Not only did he not defeat Lin Xuan, but he also couldn't even force Lin Xuan to take a step back. On the contrary, his attack was easily shattered, causing him to suffer serious injuries. The gap between them was huge. It was as if he were a spirit opening stage warrior, while Lin Xuan was a spiritual essence stage warrior. The strength that Lin Xuan had displayed at this moment had far surpassed his. Zhou Wenhao was shocked by Lin Xuan's strength and talent. But at this moment, he instantly woke up. He couldn't help but feel his hair standing on end, and his whole body was trembling. Because he felt a fatal threat. This power came from Lin Xuan's fist imprint. Ling Yun empty space destruction. Cloud soaring sword technique. Zhou Wenha's expression was serious. He struck out several sword beams and landed on his fist. The sound of metal colliding was heard continuously. However, all of the sword beams only slightly reduced the power of the fist imprint. However, Zhou Wenha's sword attack was unable to damage it in the slightest. Instead, the sword beam was broken by the rebounding force. Not good. This first print is too strong. It had exceeded the power of an early spiritual essence stage. It has definitely reached the mid-spiritual essence stage. Zhou Wenha's expression changed once more. Under his attacks, the domineering fist print only slowed down a little. However, as it approached, the fatal threat did not decrease. Instead, it increased. At this moment, how could Zhou Wenha not understand? He didn't just lose this battle completely. Furthermore, he was still far from being Lin Xuan's match. If he wanted to withstand Lin Xuan's punch, he would at least be seriously injured. He might even die in the arena. Although he didn't want to admit it, he had to admit that this was the truth. Zhou Wenha's expression changed, and he finally made a decision. He no longer blocked with his sword and instead turned around and fled down the arena. Although this was a bit of a loss of face, but if, for the sake of some so-called face, he caused serious injuries, or even damage to his foundation, he might not even be able to take part in the profound Essence List ranking competition in a month's time. That would be a huge loss. In comparison, it was obvious which one was more important. He naturally knew how to choose. As a spiritual essence stage expert, his speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, Zhou Wenha had flown several hundred meters away from the arena. Without Zhou Wenha's resistance, that incomparably domineering fist print continued downwards and landed on the arena. A terrifying vibration spread in all directions. The entire square seemed to have had an earthquake and started shaking. The spectators all cried out in pain. They fell to the ground, and the place was in chaos. Many of the weaker martial practitioners on the surrounding stands almost fell from the stands. Fortunately, when the upper echelons of the various large factions saw this, they hurriedly made a move, barely managing to stabilize the situation. At this moment, the entire plaza was filled with the sounds of miserable cries, things smashing onto the ground, and all sorts of sounds mixed together. Adding to the smoke and dust that filled the air, it became extremely chaotic. Even Zhou Wenha, who had escaped several hundred meters away, was also affected by the aftershocks. His vitality kept rolling. He spat out a mouthful of fresh blood once again, and his injuries worsened once again. He was even more shocked by Lin Xuan's strength. Silence. At this moment, a loud shout sounded like a thunderclap. It instantly suppressed all the sounds in the arena. It turned out that it was the Yang Essence sect leader, Zhang Xing, who was standing on the east side of the platform. Zhang Xing's expression was slightly ugly as well. He had presided over the Scorching Sun region competition countless times, but this was the first time the situation had become so chaotic. After that, Zhang Xing waved his hand and a violent hurricane appeared, dispersing the dust that filled the square. Only now did the scene in the square appear in front of everyone's eyes.